Imagine it's 29 June 2015. You are a 34-year-old electrical engineer living in Athens, Greece. You rent a modest apartment with your wife, and in a kitchen drawer there is an envelope of cash that you hope will last 2 or 3 weeks. You still leave home in clean shirts, still answer client emails, still pretend the future is a thing that can be scheduled. Your country has been in crisis for years, but routines are stubborn. Coffee in the morning, bills on the table, one eye on the news, one eye on the month ahead. You have done what careful people are supposed to do. You worked, you saved, you kept your head down, and like millions of others, you still want to believe the worst has already passed. If you have ever wondered how an entire generation can do everything right and still watch the floor give way beneath its feet, stay with me. What you're about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has happened before. It leaves the same marks every time. And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. Then the banks close, not because money has vanished from the earth, not because Athens stopped existing overnight, but because trust, which is the invisible floor under every financial system, has cracked. The government imposes capital controls on moving money, and Greek bank cards are limited to 60 euros a day at cash machines. Lines form at petrol stations, supermarkets fill. Tourists hunt for working ATMs. People who thought they had savings discover the difference between having money and being able to reach it. The doors are there, the accounts are there, the numbers are there, but the system has frozen like a river that looks solid until you step on it. For people outside Greece, this looked like a dramatic weekend in the Euro crisis. For Greeks, it was something else. It was the moment a private fear became public fact. The feeling that the future was shrinking had been around for years. On that morning, it had a sound: metal shutters, ATM buttons, a wife asking how much cash is left at home, a husband wondering whether he should leave his own country. That is what this story is really about. Not only debt, not only deficits, not only negotiations in Brussels. It is about what happens when a whole society is pushed through a financial bottleneck so narrow that an entire generation comes out bent. Greece is the center of the story, but it is not the only chapter. If we look closely at Greece in 2015, Argentina in 2001, Cyprus in 2013, and the wider wreckage left across southern Europe, a clear pattern appears. Different flags, different languages, same trap. Cheap money flows in, reality is ignored, a shock hits. Then ordinary people are told the bill has arrived. And the worst damage is often not the headline collapse. It is the decade that follows. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. A national collapse like this usually does not begin with empty shelves or angry crowds. It begins with a comforting illusion. Think of a family living in a beautiful apartment built on wet ground. The paint is fresh, the windows shine, the rent is low. For a while, life feels easier than it should. That is the first warning. When countries join a strong currency system or lock themselves to a strong currency, borrowing often gets cheaper. Credit, borrowed money, pours in like water through a downhill pipe. Governments can spend more easily. Banks can lend more easily. Households can consume more easily. Imports feel affordable. Growth looks real. But sometimes that growth is not a tree, it is scaffolding. It looks solid from the street, yet it holds nothing up by itself. In Greece, joining the euro brought lower borrowing costs and easier access to money. In Argentina, in the 1990s, pegging the peso to the dollar helped kill inflation, which means prices stopped racing upward. In Cyprus, oversized banks feasted on money from abroad and loaded up on Greek debt. In each case, the country gained stability first and fragility second. That is how these stories work. The gift arrives before the invoice. The core mechanism is simple. A country takes on obligations it can manage only if the good times continue. Its wages rise faster than its productivity, how much it can actually produce. Its debts grow faster than its income. Its banks and government become tangled together like two climbers tied to the same rope. Then a recession, an economic slowdown, or an external shock hits. If the country cannot print its own money freely, or cannot devalue its currency, which means make it cheaper, adjustment becomes brutal. Instead of the currency falling, incomes fall. Instead of prices resetting quickly, jobs disappear. Instead of a short fire, you get a long winter. That secret key unlocks almost everything that happened to Greece. The collapse was not just about spending too much. It was about being trapped inside a machine that turned lost confidence into lost years. This brings us directly to Greece itself. The Greek tragedy did not begin in the summer of 2015. By then, the building was already full of smoke. The real break came earlier, in 2009, when the new Greek government revealed that the budget deficit was not what many had believed. It was more than 15% of GDP, far above the limits expected inside the euro area. Public debt was around 127% of GDP. Investors began to see Greece not as a troubled member of the club, but as a warning sign for the whole club. Borrowing costs rose, confidence fell. And once confidence starts falling in a debt crisis, it does not fall like rain. It falls like an elevator with a cut cable. Greece could not solve this the way countries with their own floating currencies sometimes do. It could not simply let the currency weaken because it shared the euro. It could not print euros at will. So the adjustment came from the inside. Tax hikes, spending cuts, wage cuts, pension cuts, recession after recession. It was called austerity, which means trying to repair public finances by cutting the state. But for ordinary people, it often felt like trying to save a sinking boat by removing the floorboards. Look at the numbers. Greece's economic output fell by about 25% from 2010 levels. Unemployment reached 27%. Youth unemployment rose above 60% in 2013. By 2015, overall unemployment in Greece was still above 25%, and youth unemployment was still near 48%. Think about what that means. Not a rough month, not a hard graduation year, an entire bridge between youth and adulthood blown apart. When young people cannot find work in their 20s, they do not only lose wages, they lose time, confidence, family formation, skills, and the habit of planning. A generation is not destroyed in one explosion. It is sanded down year after year, like stone under dirty water. And this damage showed up everywhere. Reuters reported that suicides had doubled, HIV infections had surged by about 50%. Heroin use rose by 20%, and people were skipping doctor visits even when they felt they needed care. Drug shortages worsened, hospitals struggled, doctors left the country. The average Greek pension fell to about 833 euros a month from 1,350 euros in 2009. By 2015, about 45% of pensioners were receiving less than the poverty line. Those are not abstract statistics. That is a grandmother choosing which medicine to delay. That is an unemployed graduate moving back into a childhood bedroom. That is a shop owner opening the shutters each morning not to trade, but to see whether one more day is possible. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Greece's debt ratio did not collapse under this pain. It got worse. According to the IMF and other analysts, debt as a share of GDP rose from roughly 127% in 2009 to around 180% by the end of 2014. This is the part many people miss. Austerity can cut spending, but if the economy shrinks faster than the debt, the burden gets heavier, not lighter. It is like trying to lighten a backpack while the path under your feet turns into mud. Each step costs more. By the time we reach that morning in June 2015, Greece has already lived through years of cuts, protests, humiliating negotiations, and broken trust. The bank closures are not the beginning of collapse, they are the confession. They reveal what had been true for a long time. The system had become too fragile to absorb one more shock. That is why Greece matters so much. It shows how a debt crisis can move from parliament to pharmacy, from bond market to kitchen drawer, from spreadsheet to generation. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If a country cannot print the money it owes and cannot devalue the currency it uses, who really absorbs the shock when confidence breaks? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously, because what I'm about to show you next changes everything. This leads to the second part of the story. In Argentina, the crisis arrived under a different flag but with eerily familiar bones. During the 1990s, Argentina tied its peso to the US dollar at 1-to-1. The peg brought stability after years of inflation. For a while, it worked. Inflation fell to single digits. Foreign investors came in. Argentina was praised as disciplined and modern. But the peg had a hidden cost. It made the peso too strong when external conditions worsened. That meant Argentine workers and businesses became less competitive, which means it became harder for them to sell to the world. The country slid into recession. The government borrowed more. Twin deficits deepened. Argentina lacked enough dollar liquidity, which means enough ready cash in the right currency to reassure everyone at once. Then came the run on the banks. Once depositors began to fear that there were not enough dollars in the system, they rushed for the exits. The government responded in December 2001 with the corralito, a word that means a little fence. People were not told their money no longer existed. They were told they could not fully touch it. Cash withdrawals were limited. Transfers were restricted. The informal economy, which means the part of daily life that runs on cash and trust, seized up. Streets filled with anger, shops closed, riots spread. President Fernando de la Rua resigned. Argentina went through 5 presidents in just 2 weeks and defaulted on more than $100 billion in debt. Brookings notes that GDP per person fell by around 20%. Unemployment rose to 25%. Poverty reached 55%. Reuters described hunger and malnutrition in a country that had long seen itself as one of the world's breadbaskets. Thousands of young, educated Argentines left for Europe. Savings were damaged through forced conversion into pesos, called pesofication. For small depositors, that felt like watching their life savings melt in their hands. The purchasing power was leaking away. When a country builds stability on a fixed exchange rate and borrowed money, it is building a bridge from ice. It looks strong until too many people step on it at once. Different architecture, same structural weakness. Once the country lost flexibility, society had to provide the flexibility instead. Workers lost jobs, families lost savings, young adults lost time. Argentina eventually devalued. The peso fell from 1 per dollar to more than 3 per dollar in a matter of weeks. The country later recovered, helped by currency weakness and strong commodity prices. But the pain was still real. Recovery after collapse does not erase the years taken from people at the bottom. History keeps two ledgers, states and lives. Cyprus in 2013 was much smaller but showed big truths. Its banks towered over the economy like hotels on a fishing pier. Lenders had loaded up on Greek bonds. When Greek debt was restructured, big holes were blasted into balance sheets. By March 2013, Cyprus needed a rescue. But this rescue came with a twist, a bail-in. A bail-in means losses are pushed inward onto shareholders, bondholders, and large depositors. Savers lost billions. People who thought they had money in the bank discovered that part of their savings had become ownership in a broken bank. Your deposit became equity. Your savings became risk. Prudent people are told to trust banks, but Cyprus showed that is not always enough. Sometimes responsibility marks you. The state can reach directly into your account when the system above you fails. This is how crises travel, through balance sheets, bank holdings, and cross-border trust. One country's rescue can become another's wound. There is a vast difference between nominal safety and real safety, a gap between the paper promise and the lived reality. When flexibility vanishes at the top, pressure moves downward into wages, jobs, pensions, migration, and mental health. Human beings are expensive shock absorbers. They break slowly, they stop having children, they stop trusting institutions. In Greece, estimates suggest more than 500,000 citizens emigrated after 2010. History did not merely cut wages, it rearranged life courses. A country can look normal from the outside while living through an internal emergency. Collapse is a split screen. Who gets hurt most? Usually the broad middle. Pensioners, small business owners, and graduates with no experience. The parent becomes the welfare state for adult children because the actual welfare state is shrinking. Winners are often just people with distance. Distance from the local bank, the domestic labor market, or one single source of income. Survivors shared characteristics, flexibility to leave, reduced dependence on one institution, and faster acceptance of reality. When large systems fail, small systems like families and gardens become lifeboats. Realism is a kind of shelter. Return to Athens. For Dimitris, the damage was the moment he thought about emigration. First, the young stopped believing. National collapse is a transfer of pressure from institutions to households. A sovereign crisis becomes a youth crisis.